Mhm. Hi, Mary.
Hey, on.
We're getting on it. I don't know what happened to those beautiful days we were having.
I know.
So going
Back to
into
our warm sweaters
April showers. Yeah.
or hailstorms. Hey, Joy.
Oh, yeah, we got hail too. It was not something you usually get in April. All right, we've got Ernie. Let's get Ernie signed on and we'll be in good shape. You on, Ernie?
Just connected to audio.
Mm-hmm.
He may not have heard you when you first asked.
I'm
He's still
waiting.
connecting.
Yeah, there's
There he
Ernie.
is.
All right. Hello, Ernie. You're muted. So let's get started. This is the Planning Commission Solar Siting Subcommittee. I will keep admitting people as they show up. But I think it'd be good to get started. I wanted to, we had a bit of a late notice thing because Chris usually does the agenda for these meetings. And Chris is no longer on the PC. I have certainly told her that she's welcome to be a member of the solar siting subcommittee and would be, I encouraged her to do that. It's totally up to her, and she could come to the planning commission and say, yep, I'd like to do that. But for right now, I pulled it together yesterday, and because it's a special meeting where we were only waiting 2 weeks, we only needed 24 hours notice, so that worked all right. But I did want to make a point, and I'm looking at the people that are the public that's participating. I got some various notes from different people in preparation for this meeting. So I think relative to the agenda, what I would propose before we go ahead with it is to move the PUC Upper Loveland is essentially there's no action for this group. There's an informational statement about a couple things that have come through from the PUC, informational only. It's not even at the stage where the Planning Commission would do anything. Right now, the ball's in Norwich Solar's court, so in the PUC's court. So I think we can. I would like to move that up in the agenda, talk about that status, and then move into the town plan revisions conversation, because that's the meat where we actually have work to do and agenda items. So if that works, Ernie and Mary, with you, I would just rearrange the agenda and then go ahead.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda according to what you were just talking about.
Second.
All right. Given that's there are three of us, then I think we can call that moved, seconded, and I agree. Is there public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay. So then to jump into Upper Loveland, and I'll say what I understand is going on, and anybody else can chime in. But what I've seen come across as just someone who gets all the documents, the case documents that come through the PUC, was actually an order from the PUC directed twofold. One of it's directed at the interveners, whether or not they want an oral hearing. That is not ours to worry about. And then the second, which is directed at Norwich Solar, saying they need to provide affirmation that the two town bodies, the Planning Commission and the Select Board, still or reaffirm their support of the most recent plan for the Upper Loveland project. And so that importantly is the onus is put on the applicant to do that, to come up with those reaffirmations. Since that, and that was, I think, Friday, this morning or something, recent after that, Norwich Solar filed a response to that saying, we don't believe this is necessary, and here's the reasoning. It's already been seen by everybody and not reopened. Therefore, we don't have to do anything more. But this is between Norwich Solar and the PUC at this stage, where until somebody comes to us being the Planning Commission, not the Solar Siting Subcommittee, the Planning Commission, and says, we need a reaffirmation of your support, nothing has opened up for us. So that's why I don't think it's actionable for the Planning Commission yet. But with that, that's the way I see it. Anybody else, Mary, Ernie, chime in as you see fit.
I had originally read it that it was an opportunity for this committee to ask the question about whether or not they had approved the plan that was finally presented to the PUC, and they've raised a number of questions. And given the conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks about the need to be intentional and deliberate about making sure that plans reflect the town plan, that what goes to the PUC reflects the town plan, thought that gave us an opportunity to have that conversation ourselves in a very intentional way.
Yeah, I did not read it that way. I read it as very specifically an order to the applicant to
Confirmation of preferred site from Norwich municipal entities required. I'm looking at that underlined statement.
No, yeah, I understand that,
Yeah,
but if you
yeah.
look earlier or wrapped around that, it is the applicant that is required to get that. And I don't see that being driven to happen until somebody comes to us, the applicant, and says this needs to be reopened. And so that's my read. Now I will recognize Linwood. I believe I know the topic she wants to talk to, and I'll respond to that. But Linwood?
Yes, I understood from you in an email that Ms. Gorman was going to recuse herself from any discussion or anything related to the Upper Loveland project because of a conflict of interest. And the Vermont statutes require that she not even be present at the meeting if she's going to recuse herself. So what's happening?
I was never aware that I was going to recuse myself. And so that's news to me. And that's another conversation. I have spoken to council, and I'm not an intervener. I've certainly made my thoughts about the project clear, but I am not an intervener.
So Mary, and I responded to Linwood in an email. it was my understanding that when we spoke about this in the planning commission meeting, you did say something about recusing yourself from votes associated with this project. Now, I may
Well,
have.
there were no votes that we intended. We never assumed there'd be any votes attended on this one, so. I
Right.
don't think this is the time to, I don't, look at, I think this is taking this offline because I think this is a conversation that needs to happen. If you want to do it in public, I think that's fine, but my position on upper Levelland Solar was very clear to the select board. No one expected it to come back here. When I was put on the commission, I'm a resident of town, and I don't intend to recuse myself unless the attorneys tell me that I need to.
Yeah, I would add that even if someone recuses themselves on a topic, they are still able as a member of the public to speak to that topic, just as we allow members of the public who clearly have vested interests in things to speak to a topic. Somebody who has said they're not going to participate in a vote can still have an option to speak as a public member. So I think that's another piece, at least in my read of the situation of where we stand. I think for tonight's conversation, because I don't see, well, I'd start with the fact that this is the solar siting, this is a subcommittee by the subcommittee policy of the Planning Commission. We are an advisory body, not a decision-making body. So we're not gonna hold a binding vote relating to any topic, and certainly not this one. So that's the most overarching policy. And then, as I said at the beginning on this topic, I don't think it is yet time to reopen and talk through it, given how I read the order, until the applicant comes to us and has to fulfill what the PUC is asking them to do. Ernie, what do you?
Understand, excuse me, I don't understand on what basis Ms. Gorman would recuse herself from votes and yet feel she's perfectly qualified or doesn't have a conflict in participating in discussions.
I'm
statute-
sorry, that was nothing Mary said. That is something I
No, but she just said.
All right.
She just said she would not
Excuse me,
participate in
why would
votes.
why would I recuse myself?
Because you have been, you're a neighbor to this project. You've been involved.
No, I'm not. I'm not a neighbor, actually.
Well, I didn't say you were in a butter, but you live in that general neighborhood.
Okay, so people who live in the neighborhood can't have a opinion?
Well, but that gives you a vested interest in how this comes out.
In what way?
Well, there have been concerns about property values. There have been concerns about access to hiking trails. There have been all kinds of things that the group of neighbors that have opposed this project have brought up. There's litigation going on.
There's no litigation.
Well, my understanding was there was litigation going on.
There's no litigation.
The PUC has an active case. I would point out, for one thing, that there are a lot of different people with strong opinions on this. We've had opinions on both sides, on many sides, where people were very vested in it and strong enough that you could have waved a flag and said they were, somehow too strong and should recuse themselves. I live 8/10.
You live as close to it. You live closer than I do, Jan.
I live just down the road from it. So, I have not pointed that out, but I was just looking at the site plan that just went out recently. And, I say, yep, that's where I am. I'm, a few hundred yards away. So I don't think proximity or strength of opinion or should preclude somebody from speaking up. If and when we get to any voting on the matter, we can, it's a separate conversation. But at this point, we're talking about letting people speak who have opinions on the matter. And if proximity to the project or a strong opinion about climate change, solar panels, and forests, I cannot have strong opinions be a reason to not let someone speak. Rob?
I just wanted to find out if we can establish that Ms. Gorman has a close personal relationship with an intervener in the case.
Of course, my husband's an intervener, but I'm not an intervener. Believe me, my husband and I don't have the same opinions on everything.
Okay. Wanted to establish that fact. Thank you.
Do we have other conversation on the topic itself? Is there a, at this point, I was thinking that we would leave this topic until it's brought up in a more official fashion to the Planning Commission. And right now that is the PUCs to respond to Norwich Solar's filing of this morning. That's where it stands to me. Is that from the point of view of the Ernie, Mary, can we move on from that and leave that part there for now?
Yes,
We will have it. It's in the correspondence. We will have it on the agenda for the 14th. It may be informational at that time, or it may have moved to something more substantive at that time.
I
But
don't
that's
still
where it
understand
stands
why
right
she
now.
says she won't, the planning commission, she said she wouldn't vote.
Somebody needs to mute. They haven't been recognized and you're on. Okay. So let us move from that topic and we will take it up when it is brought to us more formally. I would recognize, or just to go to the next agenda item, which is correspondence. There are a couple of interesting points in the correspondence, and actually, I don't know, I know Annette, I think Annette, I saw you join. And there were a couple things in there. There was an email exchange. Well, first the Lamperti Annette sort of second or third round, I can't remember which, back and forth with TRORC, where it sounded like, I didn't see the other side of it, but it sounded like there had been some clarification to the amount of clearing that was to be done. And then Kevin Geiger at T-Rock came back and said, no, even with that smaller amount clarified, that T-Rock's policy was that figure, I think it was 2 acres per megawatt or something like that. That's their guideline, T-Rock's. And then the other thing in the correspondence was emails back and forth between me and Kevin, because I was asking both, where did that number come from? Is it a common number somehow that's used across the state? And if that number and various other things are in place, how is it realistic to think that a town like Norwich can actually cite enough solar projects to meet our goal? And so you can see that back and forth. And it's in the correspondence, so it's really just there for people to take a look at. But I did have a question to Annette, as somebody who's seen so many of these plans. That guideline that Kevin is referencing of 2 acres per megawatt of forest clearing, which is clearly different than the 3 acre maximum clear cut, even in the new version of 5100. What's your understanding? Is that something T-Rock has done themselves, or are other people referencing that?
Well, the amount of land that's been necessary for solar arrays has been coming down over the years. It used to be that you would see a 2 megawatt solar project on 9 acres. And so if they were doing it on a forested site, it might involve clearing more than that. More recently, I've seen 2 megawatt projects proposed for 4 to 5 acres. So I mean, and it all comes down to the, the technology and the how much they squeeze them together. One of my beefs with solar arrays is that they tend to site them at the summer angle, so they don't shed snow. And when we really need the power is in the winter. And so the summer angle maximizes the money, but the winter angle, and so that plays into how close they can be together. And if they were at the winter angle, they'd probably need to have them a bit further apart so they wouldn't shade each other. But those are the sorts of things that you see that come into it. And as far as, you know, I think I said this before, as far as the targets go, when the solar siting task force was meeting, this goes back to 2014, 2015, they talked about every town should, you know, have a target. That was kind of the idea. And then they realized that a lot of towns just don't have the capacity for it. And so I struggle a little bit with seeing towns like yours that have you know, limited capacity for siting solar. I mean, that's, you know, you've got a lot of rooftops and you've got a lot of people who've installed rooftop solar, and that's great. But from my perspective, having watched the trajectory of all this for the last decade and the discussions that led up to this Act 174 law, it just it's to me it's a goal, it's not a target. I think that
Mhm.
you're correct to look at it, but I mean, part of my problem is I don't have a crystal ball. You know, I read articles about China and Japan are in a war right now over thin film solar. Is that going to change things if that happens? If everybody can just go put perhaps less productive, but easier to install, no glass, no racking needed. I don't know how it would get attached to things, but that's apparently coming along. So who knows what's going to happen in the future? And so I think that it's important when you think about your plan, try not to be bogged down in that, what is it, 16 megawatt number,
Yeah.
because that just seems so daunting. And technology is improving. The solar technology has a lot of people working on it, way more than, for instance, wind technology, which is just it's kind of stuck in this three-blade model, and they just make them bigger. But there is a ton of competition going on in the solar world. So that's
Okay. Yeah, now that was really my question, and this is a good lead into the town plan conversation to say, um, because simplistically, the question was, uh, can we have an approved enhanced energy plan? How credible does our plan have to be in showing that we'll be able to meet that goal?
well,
Uh,
you could ask Two Rivers about that goal because I'm not seeing that as a requirement that other planning commissions are doing. Um, you know, people are not coming up with preferred site maps to site that much solar, for instance.
right. And right, so if a plan can get approved by Two Rivers, for example, that is just pretty weak on exactly how you're going to meet the goal, and that's still acceptable, then that's something to have in our minds. If we absolutely have to show 5x the preferred sites of the acreage required because we know that it won't go everywhere we point to, then it's a daunting task, as you say.
Well, I mean, one of the things to do is look at the guidelines that are offered to the towns for this. And, you know, most of it literally is taking the data you get from them and plugging it in. The extra work you can do is, can you identify some sites where you would uh, like to designate as preferred sites for 150 kilowatt project, for a 500 kilowatt project, for a 2 megawatt project? That's an interesting exercise to see what you have in town and what would fit given the acreage requirements. So for instance, a 500 kilowatt array is about 3 acres. Um, and 150 kilowatt, you've just gotten that number from from this correspondence you have. And, if it's forested, that means cutting more, because you have to cut the trees around it too. So you want to look first for not forested sites. And, but these preferred site maps are not required. You are not required to produce a plan that says, here's where we're going to site 16 megawatts of solar.
Okay. So that's one question. I did have another question, and then I'd turn it over to you. Mary, you did a lot of work on the town plan revision, so I want to give you the time to walk us through the thinking. I had a question in a conversation with Pam Smith, the chair of the select board, just asking the question, in the new version of 5100, does it change the ability of us to say the whole town is default preferred site? Is there something about the way that new regulation talks about preferred siting that makes the way our current plan is written not valid? That was Pam's question to me today.
I don't think so. I mean, what the changes that were made to the preferred site part of it had to do with how these letters are acquired. In fact, it's exactly what you're dealing with. So they changed it so that a preferred site letter cannot be gotten until after the advance notice is issued. And that automatically involves notification to neighbors, and that there is a site plan that's fairly far along. And there is some additional language about directive to the planning commissions that you have to affirm that it complies with your plan, not just that you support it being a preferred site, but that you've actually looked at your plan and make sure that it complies with the plan. They also have made a change for projects that are going to be on preferred sites that you cannot clear any more than 3 acres
Yeah.
of forest. And I think that policy perhaps came about partly because of the sorts of things that you're dealing with in this particular contentious project. But I'm sort of struck, it's kind of an odd question. Is there something that would negate your town having the whole town be a preferred site? I mean,
well, just that's what ours currently says. I think that's why she's heard that statement in various presentations and wonders whether somehow that's gotten
well, okay, so look at the Lamperty case. Your whole town is a preferred site, but he's trying to cut into a high priority forest block, which Two Rivers is never going to approve. And so there are a lot of different variables that go into these things. So the fact that your town is very forested would not allow for carving out holes in the forest for solar arrays to meet your targets. In that sense, no, there's no change in the new rule about it, but that is how to think about it.
Okay.
Okay.
So then if we could open it up more generally to the work that's in the packet, and all I did was take what I think were the sections that had edits in them to try and make it a little smaller for the packet. And I would ask if you could just to get my head around it, if not everybody else's, to kind of start with the statements of what you were thinking at a high level, to say this is we went at the town plan and said, oh, we want to make it regulatory or specific, or and then drop into the changes that you put in there.
Sure, thank you. So at the end of the meeting of this solar subcommittee 2 weeks ago, the charge really from the members of the solar subcommittee, where they said what we'd like to do is take a look at the town plan and how to kind of make it more clear the regulatory teeth of this plan, and and just articulate it clearly. And I think that the bigger goal is that when the Lamperty decision was denied by the TROC, I think there was some reflection. I felt some reflection on planning board members about, gee, what is the rubric that we will use to kind of intentionally review these projects to see whether or not they abide and support, they are in line with the town plan. And so this was the first step to try to say, okay, what within the town plan would we want to have in some ways in that rubric as we're going through and looking at different preferred sightings. And so we did some work. I did some work. I took the town plan, transformed it from a PDF to a Word document. There's some wonkiness with some capitalizations and things, which is just part of that transition. And I didn't pay attention to that. So you'll see those changes. But I looked closely at the East Mount Pelier town plan, which is known to be a very strong plan in terms of a whole lot of levels, in terms of how it reflects the town's intentions, how it describes the different values that the town has, and really thinks about the kinds of regulations or the kinds of values that it wants to guide the decision making. So, and this group had a robust discussion at the last meeting about some of the specific areas that we would want to, that we thought were really important. We talked about ridge lines, we talked about slopes, we talked about a number of things. And so I went through and I see this, my work, and then I passed it off to Annette and asked her if she would take a look at it. I see this as a first pass. I'm sure there's some things that you'll all want to edit out that maybe, and then I think there's probably additional things we want to edit in to this, but it was, it was in the spirit of making a first swing so that we could all then look at it. Everything that we touched in this town plan, we did through review changes, so that is highlighted in red. Anything deleted is crossed off, so to be extremely transparent about what has happened, so that was one of the guidelines we had. We wanted to show everybody specifically what had been done. So that's the overview. Some comments, just, kind of in the introduction, you can see that we talked a little bit. There was one edit about the purpose. The plan is a policy statement for guiding future land use and municipal decision-making, as opposed to this plan is a guide for municipal decision-making. So just some clarification, that's just more clarification there about what the purpose is. And then highlighted in the second page, when using this plan for regulatory purpose, the objectives, policies, and actions must be specific policies and land conservation measures, really to move away from things being less than clear. Is it helpful, Jan, just to go through it like this or not? I don't want to be dreadfully boring by going through line by line.
I think for right now it is.
Okay.
And I think obviously, and I put the great big draft watermark on it so that everybody's clear that we are, this is, and it's always helpful to have somebody put the work in to get something we can look at specifically. So I think for right now, it is worthwhile stepping through. And obviously, if we get bogged down on, where's the comma and whether the words, we'll stop. But let's kind of skim through it and see what it really looks like.
Yeah, and so under objectives, I think the objectives are just such a clear statement of what the town values. And at the last one, being cleared, revise the zoning and subdivision regulations and guide development through specific policies in this plan, informed by the climate crises, specifically the ability of existing forest cover to provide ecosystem services such as carbon absorption and sequestration. I just highlighted that because I thought, especially given in light of the decision or the situation with the Lamperti project. So that's not a change. That was just a highlight, and the blue is the change. And Annette, jump in on anything that we need to
so
talk
we're on
about
page
more.
4 right now.
We are under policies. And so, I think these policies are just important. The first one, no change. The second one, protect forest blocks and riparian wildlife connectivity, guide development away from priority forest blocks and discourage fragmentation or subdivision of land within those blocks. And I just ended it there without a, the kind of the comment that would adversely impact natural resource values, including absorption and sequestration of carbon dioxide. I think that the goal here is just to say forest blocks are forest blocks. And that's an inherent quality that they had.
And so when I looked at this, I guess I took out promote and changed it to protect. So
Yeah.
that's the sort of way that I was looking at the language in the plan that provides better guidance, if that's what you want to say. I think it was
Right,
promote.
and I think that's the kind of question. So we kind of have method and then we have content questions.
Mhm.
There are method statements that say if you want to protect something, you got to say protect, you got to say must, and things like that. That's how we do what we want to do. And then there are content questions
Right.
that say, hey, do we care about forest blocks? Do we
Right.
care, what is it that the town plan's trying to protect or promote?
Right, so
that's a good, it's a good to distinguish.
What was there? Promote protection of forest blocks. That's several steps away from protecting forest blocks. So I wanted to use that as an example to show, say what you want to say instead of just the more visioning type thing.
Yeah. Linda, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to ask this question, which is, for the most part, I think the lens through which you all are looking at this language relates to the possibility of solar development. But I want to ask, it's like, how do the changes, or how does the language affect houses? Like, so the question that I have is, like, if you look at the high priority forest block around the Lamperti land, you see these little bubbles of that are not high priority forest block because there's houses there. And so what if Aaron, instead of wanting to put a solar project on his land, what if he wanted to build another house? How would any of this language be applied to that type of development that would be in a high priority forest block?
It's a good question. The only thing I would add or put in, and please confirm, is that there are definite statements where you cannot treat PV different than other developments. You can't say, no, you can't have PV, but you can build, the most hideous structure you possibly want. So please confirm if that's the case, and then, is it in the definitions of development that the distinctions are made? Or because we aren't saying you can't put PV in a forest block, we're saying protect the forest block. So to Linda's point, that conceivably stops you from doing a wider variety of things in forest blocks.
So the question, though, is also related to how does the town plan come into play in a regulatory proceeding having to do with housing? And unless it's going through Act 250, it wouldn't. It would be through your land
Zoning.
use regulations and your zoning.
Yeah.
And so those are the restrictions that would relate to housing development, unless somebody was going through Act 250. If it is going through Act 250, then the town plan has to contain those words must and shall, and to be regulatory. And it also in Act 250, the development has to comply with the town plan. It's not just a standard of due consideration or substantial deference. And so if your town plan had words like must and shall related to housing developments that were going to go through Act 250, then that would be regulatory. But for individual houses, that would be your local zoning.
So it wouldn't matter. So this change in that, just to be clear, that that we, at least for the time being, have proposed would not have an impact on someone, on Aaron wanting to build a house next in a lot that he owned next door.
No, and actually this language is still general. It's not specific to a specific forest blocks, or if it's not a specific policy, or it's stronger language and instead of promote the protection of, but you still have to be more specific in what forest blocks you want to protect and what riparian wildlife connectivity you want to protect.
So to follow that for a second, does that, and I'm thinking of what Two Rivers said relative to, well, my question where I said, how the heck are we going to cite anything? And Kevin said, well, the whole eastern part of Norwich is not a priority 1 forest block, so we would look at it differently. Back to the question of the town plan as a regulatory document, does that mean that somewhere in here, and maybe we do it later, we distinguish between priority forest block and other kinds of forest block to be specific enough to get at clearly what Two Rivers is thinking about when they make that distinction?
That's kind of what you need to do is look specifically at the areas in town, whether it's the scenic resources or the and try and be as specific as possible in where you want to guide development. And
Yeah.
I do find there is value in some of what is not shown as high priority forest blocks. I end up doing some work in areas that have what I would call urban forests, and they have tremendous value. They're filled with wildlife. They absorb the pollutants, air pollutants from traffic. And so I have a little problem with just protecting the highest priority forest blocks. And so that, you know, the connectivity is a piece of it, and it's a challenge to look at your town through this lens of future development. But if you can really look closely at what forests are okay to cut down and build houses and put solar panels. You know, in Sudbury, they came up with a preferred site map, and one of the sites was a forested site. And I talked to them about it, and they're like, yeah, we talked to the landowner. We looked at the quality of the woods, and we're all okay with that.
Linda, did you have a follow-up?
I just wanted to say that I think, like Annette's answer about the different regulatory processes that the town plan gets looked at, that's one lens. Earlier, Mary had talked about values as reflected in the town plan, the values of the community. So that's something that I feel like that is very important to. I'm kind of concerned that this process is got a lens of where and how can we stop solar development in Norwich, whereas I don't feel like that is a value that we want to pursue and that we want the town plan to reflect. So, you know, I would say we do want to encourage more housing in Norwich. I would not support trying to encourage housing out, you know, behind Aaron Lamperti's house. I would like to see housing, you know, closer to our village and along advanced transit lines and stuff like that. So there are a variety of not exactly competing, but we have a whole lot of values to balance out and try to support as many of them as we can. So I just want to kind of be a little bit more high level and make sure that your goal as you review this stuff is not solely focused on no solar.
Well,
I want to be clear.
Mary,
That's
yeah,
not a goal.
Mary,
That's not a goal. That's not a
yeah,
goal.
let me
It's just
be
silly.
clear too,
That's silly.
and I, because I think we heard something about this in the last meeting as well, and I'm only speaking for myself. That's all I can do, but I am absolutely not trying to recraft the town plan to make it harder to site solar. If you look at the letter, just the one I was going back and forth with Kevin at T-Rock, my question to him was, hey, if we want to make our goal, if we want to play our part in the state energy plan, how can we do that? What tools do we have? Where do we put it? How do we do it? So I very much am trying to capture the will of the town and put that into place relative to the values. But I personally am not trying to make it harder to put solar. And I want that to be clear. I think what we've learned, and Annette's point is a good one, we have learned in a few recent cases, and by getting involved in the state conversations, that the town plan is being used for different reasons in solar siting and than it used to be. And we're trying to recognize that and appropriately adjust it so it still reflects the desires of the town with that new context. Mary?
Yeah, I want to respond as well. I don't know anything that's been in these edits that is anti-solar. I think the goal is to define a town plan that reflects opportunities to develop this town in a way that is respectful of the landscape that we have, and that says solar is fabulous if you put it in the right place. And I would argue that if you put it on a steep slope on a ridge line, and that's been able to be that's a concern. So where are the right places? Where's the right place? You don't want to put a house here. You want to put a solar here. What's the right place? How do we find the right balance that describes the town and all of its competing desires, tensions, etc.? And that's the goal. And the goal is not at all to say no solar. The goal is to say, let's have a plan that describes the town that we want to see.
Mary Albert?
What's the process for allowing us, just regular old citizens, to have input to the proposed rewording of our town plan?
Well, the first step is what we're doing right now, which is to look at a draft and let anybody speak that wants to speak. Then at some point, this goes, any draft, any conversations go to the full planning commission, where we also let anybody speak that wants to speak. And at some point, it goes to decisions at the planning commission level that then roll into decisions at both public hearings and then select board. So
I'd like to
have
input onto the wording in the plan before it goes for any decision making.
That's understood.
yeah.
So clearly, we can have whatever conversation we're having tonight. Anybody that wants to, and I would encourage it. I would love to have people go through this draft and send, it would be, correspondence to the planning mailbox and say, I like this wording better, or I'd rather add something here, or I don't like that change. I would love to get a full mailbox full of comments, even after we slog through it in detail tonight or several more nights.
Yeah, this is the first time I've seen any of these changes, so I would like to go through it, and I'll send in
agreed.
comments.
Yeah, and
I
to
imagine
be
others
clear,
will-
this is the first time anybody's seen it. This is Barry doing us a favor by digging in and making some changes in a document. And I must add, it's rather entertaining that we did have quite a problem with how to get a Word editable copy of the town plan. And that seemed to have slowed us down for a while earlier in the year. That seemed to have been a minor bump in the process here. So thank you. But this is brand spanking new, has draft all over it. And please chime in with specific changes or general comments. Ernie?
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we just want to
Hmm.
I actually it asked for some sort of special permissions, and I had
Oh.
to apply to something that
That was when I tried to share it with you as a member of the committee, and
that's
then
why it
yeah.
went in the packet and was turned into a PDF. So
Yeah.
the PDF should be accessible to all.
Yeah,
and
that's clear.
just work off of that. And then there are various open meeting law things about shared documents and so forth. So for right now, I would say anybody who either thinks of something after this conversation or doesn't want to, doesn't have it ready to say tonight, absolutely feel free to put anything in writing referencing the draft or just something out of the blue and send it in to the planning and zoning mailbox. And it'll get in the correspondence for the next meeting and it'll get in the public record.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. You want to keep walking us through, Mary?
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't clear. I think I said it was a first swing at it, and we'd like a lot of input on it. So the next one is a stronger worded, and development shall not be permitted on visually prominent locations on ridgelines and hills as viewed from public vantage points. And I think this is probably an area. This will be one that there'll be a lot of discussion on. Many towns actually go in and list. Here are the vantage points. This is our town plan is currently says public vantage points, and there's been some discussion about what is a public vantage point, and the town zoning talks about scenic roads, but the town plan does not. And so this is an area I think that just we need to clarify and get some agreement on, what are the ridge lines? Are they all ridge lines, ones that can be viewed only from prominent roads? And if you say scenic views, are we going to get into an issues that only areas in potentially the super wealthy parts of town are protected and get some privileged areas in non-privileged areas? So I think this is an area that does need a lot of good discussion. Our public vantage points, how do we think about public town forests, right? Because that's a vantage point. And so again, this is one that will, I'm sure, get some additional attention. But many town plans
and just to
actually
point
will
out, sorry,
define,
well, just to point out that we have a scenic inventory that's referenced in just the bylaws, the
right,
zoning bylaws,
bylaws.
and it's 20 years old.
Right.
And so both of those times have changed. Some version with some teeth needs to be in the plan, and then it needs to be updated.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's clearly, and we flagged this, months ago, a scenic inventory, redoing the scenic inventory as a clear piece of work needing to be done. Ernie?
I just think that would be easiest done as a table, listing, just simply listing the stuff. It's a nice objective way of making the statement of what can be and what cannot be and it'd probably make it clearer and less open to interpretation and conflict and ambiguity and so on. I think it's also something that we were talking about the last meeting too, is we've got to make the town plan much more of a legal document than it used to be, than it's always been understood to be,
Mm-hmm.
which means a lot more specificity.
I wanted to offer a couple of comments. On the scenic part of it, as East Montpelier did, they have the list of the roads or views, and then they also have a map. And I wonder if it would be worthwhile for members of the planning commission to drive around town and take a map with you and all have the same map and individually mark out what you think the scenic views are. And then compare and see what, where you come down on it. That's one way of doing it.
Is there just a logistics question almost? We talked about this, the scenic, because you talk about ridge lines and you talk about scenic views. One is a view, one is what you're looking at, and one is where you're looking from. And so I'm trying to, so you kind of have to do both of those in an inventory. You have to say, is it all ridge lines? It's one of those, tree falls
Right.
in the forest thing, but a visual version of it. If it's a ridge line that no one can see, can it be a scenic resource? That kind of a question, I think you just would help. If I was driving around with a map, I'd say, this is scenic. Do I protect that hill, or do I think about it from my vantage point?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
And
think, I'm sorry, you
that-
first.
This isn't about solar, but that could come into play as you write a plan. If somebody wanted to do a wind turbine on a ridgeline that you couldn't see, but if you got a 500-foot wind turbine there, and it is a generally scenic area, yeah, then it does matter, even though yeah, it's a very good example. The other thing I wanted to call out here was the language here that I changed. So it did say guide development away from visually prominent locations on ridgelines and hills. I put this development shall not be permitted on partly to show you the kind of language that you really would like to get into this plan. I'm not saying that this is the language you want about, no ridgeline development at all. But I did want to change out that guide development away to something stronger to serve as an example of the type of language that you need to be trying to get into the plan that is specific to certain things.
I got two things I kind of want to address. The first
Go
one
ahead.
is simply having to do with language. There are new, well, it's over the past 10 years or so, new ways of drafting legislation and policy and so on that have been approved at various levels of state and federal agencies and so on, and they deal and legislatures to make language more clear and less lawyer-like, and more accurate, more less open to ambiguity. So you were saying shall. Well, that's one of the words, and I'm just being a little nitpicky right now because we could have a much longer conversation about this later. The word must is being substituted now for shall.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
shall actually can be ambiguous. Must is much more mandatory.
I heard there was a Supreme Court case about it. So you're
That's
absolutely
part of
right.
it.
Yep.
Part of it.
So
Yep.
use must when you can.
So
Not-
I'm just being a lawyer. I'm just being a lawyer here. So just don't mind me. But
No, you're
that's one
right.
thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to bring up, which has troubled me a lot during not just today's conversation, but actually maybe for years. We're always talking about ridge lines for scenic purposes, but there are other reasons why they shouldn't be disturbed besides just scenic purposes.
Exactly.
They're environmentally bad places to build, and they're in a practical sense bad places to build. The houses on a ridgeline or buildings on a ridgeline are exposed to much more severe weather than something that's downslope, so on and so forth. They're harder to access, all kinds of reasons. And I'm thinking that instead of just focusing on ridge lines that are visible, and that also goes to what happens if you can't see the ridge line. Is it of no value? That's a kind of dumb concept, if you ask me. I mean, a ridge line either is valuable for a whole pile of reasons that
Water
have
quality.
nothing to do with our subjective what is pretty or what
Right.
is you know, and I think that we really should be focusing not on ridge lines just because they're scenic, because they have a whole bunch of other reasons for practical, environmental, whatever you want to call them, reasons, and we should be focusing more broadly on that stuff and not wearing. I don't think we should really have to drive around. I think every ridgeline should just be not allowed to be used. Some, you know, find some good practical standard, but how far from the center line of a ridge you go down the slope to, you know, say must not be developed. And I found when I was trying to develop a sort of method of determining how much population forest blocks can absorb, and then try to relate that to how much development should go on within a town, or how many people should be in a town, so that they, you know, relative to how much carbon dioxide the town landmass can absorb, so that each town, I'm trying to develop something that comes up with each town can take care of and absorb its own carbon dioxide emissions.
Yep.
And that was actually put in. Rod graciously tried to protect it, and that was the only thing that was taken out of the prior this town plan was that particular policy. The case is that extension services and stuff like that I've used as resources have information like this, so that you can develop a policy like that. So we would be able to find out, you know, more I'm going to use the word expert wording on why ridgelines in general, you know, and find they would have some measurements or some sort of statistic of how far down a slope really people should stay away from the top, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And we have there's tons of that, and I extensively used the extension
Mhm.
services, both Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts, and they were excited about the algorithm I came up with. So
And I think Ernie, it gets back to the question about values and what
yes,
values. You
yes,
define what you value. And,
exactly.
you know, so forest blocks, it's wildlife habitat, it's carbon, it's, you know, there's
Yep,
6, 8,
exactly.
10 things. The reason we value forest
Right.
blocks.
And so I'm
and
saying ridge lines is the same thing. It's not just how pretty it is, how scenic it is. It's a whole pile of other things that we never mention. And if we were only talking about scenic, then only the places where somebody who's, I don't know, I'm going to be prejudiced and I'm not going to say it. But we're going to have the wrong values if we're just looking at scenic,
Mhm.
using scenicness. Yeah, it's a valid one. I mean, it's valid. It is a valid one, but I say there's a lot more than just that. And you know, it's just like saving forest blocks. You just listed off the top of your head a half a dozen good reasons why not to disturb forest blocks. There's probably just as many good reasons, and maybe, you know, to stop, to not develop ridgelines. And there's other types of geological formations and all kinds of other reasons to not develop different things too. I'm just right now we're talking about ridgelines, but we should be considering this for all kinds of areas. Farmland is a good one too. We need the food. Why are we to find ways to make it so farmland is not, especially because a lot of farmland is what's being taken up now. It's looked as prime. It's like the developers in the 50s when they looked at every farm as a place to plop a lot of houses. Now some types of developers are looking as a prime place to plop a lot of solar panels. You know, we need farms too. We need to eat as well as have electricity.
Yeah.
Ernie's
Linda?
reminding me of a New Hampshire public television show I saw last week. You can find it online. It's the Merrimack River at Risk. And it was a very well done show that ends up talking about how important it is to protect the forests and the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Linda?
the water quality aspects of it are really important.
This has been stuff that I've been working on since college. Oh, no, not professionally, but, and I'm
Okay.
really old, so.
Yeah. Linda?
Just a quick reminder, as you talked about, and this now been probably 10 minutes ago, talked about looking at scenic, at vantage point and stuff like that. And the examples that came up in the discussion were solar or wind. And I do want to remind you that for everything, you got to think of it broadly. You have to think of it as like, oh, whatever rule or guideline that you put in there, you think of it as applying to everything, not just think of it as applying to renewable energy siting, think of it as applying to any kind of development.
Yep,
Yeah.
you're right.
I agree. I would ask, I mean, I certainly agree with that, and that's part of our, it's clearly part of our charter as the planning commission. And I'm wondering if we can be smart enough about it to say, okay, ridge lines are valuable for these reasons, forest blocks, wetlands, whatever they are that they're valuing. You have that almost independently stated, and then because there are regulatory reasons where the town plan should say things about solar, well, fine. Then we translate we value ridge lines to things relating to solar in the town plan, but we don't stop there. We say, oh, okay, for housing and structures and things like businesses, whatever, that kind of development, it's the zoning bylaws or the subdivision regs that are the place to express, protect, guide, whatever, to that kind of development. So we start with the value, and then depending on what's the tool, cascade it to that.
So why don't we keep
Yeah, let's
rolling? We
Take another
just,
step.
yeah.
This is an
Yeah.
icebreaker. This is an icebreaker strategy where you build up a head of steam, plow through a
Yeah.
page, and then slow
So-
to a dead stop.
So the next one, Ernie, this is for you. Encourage conservation of primary ag soil for current and future ag use. The change here was simply to make it a parallel structure, just my English grammar stuff. The next one is a little different. Guide development away from steep slopes. And in this, we defined what a steep slope is. And I'm actually been looking at Joy Kenseth, and if you can all see her and see the steep slope that's right over her shoulder. And the, that development on top of above her home is on the slope that steep is actually threatening her home. And, because of the, Ernie was and Annette were just talking about the value of ridge lines and slopes in terms of, water retention and, thinking about the floods that we had last year. And so, this is a comment that is really about, protecting the watersheds, protecting our areas for, and protecting homes. Yeah, Ernie.
Could you just, I keep on getting kind of lost. If you wouldn't mind, saying what section, the 2.2.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on 2.2E as in Ernie.
Yeah.
Well, also, in order to be able to have zoom up and also this
I
thing.
know.
Oh, that's, yeah, it's page 19 of the packet.
Yeah, no, I matter of fact, I'm on the right page. I just can't find the paragraph because
Sorry.
print is
Yeah.
so tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got two screens going, so I'm cheating.
Yeah.
So that one, I'm sure
so I
there might
think
be some
that's-
conversation, but just to try to articulate that. And that's a fairly standard percentage that I've seen in other town plans.
I mean,
So that's how that figure was
25
determined at least
degrees.
for starting point. Yeah.
That was included in this town's also until recently. It
Really.
in the statute, I mean, in the planning regulations, 25 degrees has been in the past part of our regulations. So that was good on your part that you were able to come up with the same thing the town already has.
And that might be in the zoning bylaws.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
So consistent. But again, if you have something going to the PUC, they're going to turn to the
Yes.
zoning. If you have something going that's not going through that process, and they're looking just for permit to build something, then it goes through zoning. So making sure that they're the same makes sense. And right
Yes.
now they haven't been the same, and it's been a lack of clarity on the town plan. And I think that has caused some confusion. Guide residential development. Here's residential development for those thinking that the solar committee is too focused on solar. It's in accordance with the objectives, policies, and actions, and specific policies and land conservation measures of this plan. So, Annette, you added this one.
Yeah, and actually, if it's about residential development, it doesn't necessarily need to be there because
Okay.
that language, specific policies and land conservation measures is what the PUC wants to see.
All right. So that's not going to be.
That-
for
yeah.
But your point is that the PUC is not looking at the plan. I mean, it's not looking at, or to deal with development, residential development.
Right.
No,
So
exactly.
I
But
was
it
mistaken.
still belongs in land use, though.
Yeah, I mean, the plan should say something. Clearly, the plan in land use should be talking about development and all types of development.
Yeah.
Whether the rigor of specificity and regulatory language is the same for that kind of development in the plan is part of the question.
Well, and
Is there any,
the
sorry,
land
is there any downside to, what's the negative of being specific in the plan, even for things that that currently don't need to be regulatory in the plan?
I don't know that there is one. I mean, your land use regulations are supposed to be implementing the plan. And so the guide residential development in accordance with the objectives, policies, and actions of this plan, maybe it should say as implemented by the land use regulations. Because that's where the development guidance actually happens, is in your land use regulations.
Alternatively, though, the plan comes ahead of is what sets our policy.
Right.
And the so really the regulations have to refer to the town plan, not the other way around. And I think that part of the reason we're going through this, if I remember correctly, from last meeting and maybe a meeting before, is that at least for the purposes of solar siting and whoever it is that somebody requires that specific information. I think it was the scenic. It started with, this whole thing started with scenic ridgelines and stuff.
Ridgelines, yeah.
And
referred to the town.
that has to be in the town plan.
Right. But
So-
but your town plan currently says, oh, look at our ridgeline policy in our land use regulation.
Right, but then
That
we
doesn't
can't-
work.
We
Yeah.
can't do that anymore.
Can't do that. But-
And the thing is that there's nothing saying that as this is not specifically solar siting specific, but as we're going along, we might find that there's going to be more and more judicial type entities looking at our town plan, since that's where the policy. I mean, even the development review boards look at the town plans. If the regulations aren't clear, they use the town plan to at least interpret, if not provide the actual policy. So we might as well be including this. So I'd say this really does make sense to even keep it in here, even if it's not specifically solar right now, and even if it's not part of this specific conversation. It's good that it's put here now, because then we can start remembering that this is not, the town plan is not just about solar siting. And let's face it, this is a subcommittee of the planning commission. And the planning commission is not the subcommittee of solar siting, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And so if we can kill two birds with one stone while we're in here working on solar siting, and somebody comes up with another good piece of policy, well, we might as well include it. You know, we can either eliminate it later if it turns out it's cumbersome or not right or something, but include it until 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 we're ready to cast it in stone,
Yeah.
Okay.
cast it in concrete. Don't cast stone, not too much.
So I've moved forward a couple of pages. I'm looking at a different document than you all, but to the 2.5, the future land use is when the next edit is.
Page
and,
24, it's page 24 of the packet.
Yeah. And in this, we made the edits on steep slopes again to be consistent. They're poorly sited to development, and development on slopes greater than 25 degrees shall be prohibited. Maybe must be, will be prohibited.
Must be prohibited.
Must be.
Must be.
Must not be, are prohibited, must not be used, there's all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Riparian areas, including floodplains, are sensitive to a sensitive environment, often subject
Excuse
to
me.
flooding. Yeah,
Are prohibited.
please.
They are prohibited, not must be. That's where you use are instead of.
Are prohibited. Okay, great. I will just make that. Okay, are prohibited. That is correct. And develop, and then so riparian areas, development these areas is prohibited.
Is or are, yes.
Development are prohibited.
Development is.
Development is prohibited. Refer to a map where these specific areas are identified. So again, this is going to be something where you want to be specific. And again, open for whether this is a strong statement, obviously, and people in town may want to have some comments on that. I'm rolling down through. I am getting a couple more pages down in the resource protection area. There's no number on it.
Page
Jan, if
27.
you can help me with the
Page 27 of the PDF.
Resource
27?
yeah, 27 in the packet. Yeah.
Annette, do you want to talk about this?
Well, these districts that you have,
Yeah.
the residential planning area, the rural planning area, this is a place to put in specific language about what is allowed in these areas. And that can be helpful guidance to the PUC. I will admit, this is very hard to write these plans. I partly view this as how to torture planning commissions, but it is the sort of place where if you have a specific district, which you do, the resource protection planning area, then what is it you want to see in that area? What don't you want to see it? I mean, it's most of the land in the town. But
Can
type of-
somebody answer the question? Because as you mentioned in that last time, we have future land use areas and then we have current districts. Now, I understand the current districts in the sense that they're used directly in the zoning bylaws and obviously the subdivision regs to say in rural residential, here's the minimum lot size and so on. So those current districts are used as shorthand for bundles of regulations. Are these like the districts like resource protection, when they're called future land use areas, are they then binding or as concrete as the current districts that are used in the regs?
That's what I wanted to address just now. Because I've always called this the black box because it's kind of an algorithm that we use for density, the density algorithm, which we don't really, most of the town is rural residential. So most of the town is under one big bundle, one set of regulations. And it doesn't really prohibit specific things you can build and not build. Instead, what it does is it says you can do certain things or a certain number of things within certain parameters, like distance from the town hall, slope, wetland. I think there's one or two other new, relatively more recent things than before since I've memorized this. But it for the most part, this town doesn't really use areas. it uses this thing that sort of says you can have do more development of the kind here and less, further away from the center of town on steep slopes and all these other things. And it's actually a much better than zoning or picking areas and saying sort of arbitrarily you can only do this or this in these places, because there's always someone who wants to challenge that on constitutional grounds eventually. Whereas the system we have is based on the actual conditions of the land and says, you don't build on steep slopes because it's a dumb idea, and you don't build in forest blocks because we need the forest blocks for a whole bunch of other environmental reasons that help us, and so on and so forth. So it becomes much harder to attack legally.
So let me think through this though, because it sounds like what we're talking about in terms of the formula, the algorithm is a weighting function that
Yes.
guides
Exactly.
development, so if I'm a developer and I want to, put 5 houses somewhere, it's gonna put it, it guides, but in a pretty amorphous weighting
Well,
kind of way. And then, sorry, but then before, and we've talked a lot about the must-haves or must-not builds here, which is very different than a weighting function, so it's these two different elements, one that encourages and promotes, makes it more likely that this kind of development will happen here versus there. And we're not saying we're not going to do that anymore. We're not saying that all weighting functions and more general guidance is to be dropped. We're only going to do everything in musts and shalls. But I'm trying in my head to figure out what's the right tool for which kinds of things.
Ernie, are you a lawyer, Ernie?
Yes.
I'd
Don't
like to
hold it
say,
against me, please.
what?
Don't hold it against me, please. I also am an engineer.
I'd like to
That might
send
be worse.
two Vermont Supreme Court decisions, one of which they both grapple with this district part of these decisions, and they're both in the same case. They involved, the first one is a split decision, 3-2, and the Chief Justice was among the minority, and I kind of agreed with them. It's a complicated grappling with how specific the district language is. So I'd like to have you look at that, because I think that might help inform this discussion a bit. This case was remanded twice, so there are two different decisions from the Supreme Court, but they both involve the same case. And I'm thinking you might be able to provide some clarity to yourself, but to perhaps the rest of us, on how to think about these various areas. So I'll send that to Mary and she can send it to you.
Okay.
Mhm.
I mean, this town has already used this weighting thing, but there is still mandatory. There are still mandates in it, I mean, and it's fairly effective. I mean, what it does, for instance, the town's general layout is close to the Norwich downtown is pretty dense, and it's been like that historically. Out in the boonies, as you get to, for instance, to West Norwich and Beaver Meadow and all those areas, the population's been pretty sparse. So right off the top, the mileage one does a lot of weighting, so that by the time you get out to, let's say, 1 mile from town, you have it's still fairly discrete, 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. We might want a little more fading there than that. But the point is that, by the time you get out to West Norwich, which is where my property is, you're as far out of town as you can get. You're about 6 miles out of town, almost. You're got steep slopes, so that counts against it. So, and you have wetland, so that counts against it. So basically, I have 58 acres of forest block with a small, tiny piece set aside for a house, which at that time was legal to build. It now might be problematic to build, and that is all I can put on 58 acres. is
Mhm.
1.6 houses and 0.6 doesn't count. And the point I'm making is that it doesn't really, what's happening is it's following a historic pattern, even though that's not explicit in the language of the regulation. But it does protect people. It protects the town from people saying, "Hey, I paid $100,000 and I'm not going to get my 100,000." You know, getting your money out of what you've bought is the basis of the takings arguments that and all that stuff. So,
So, Annette, what do you think? Do you have suggestions specifically of the ways to use districts, this one in particular, but in general, to do what we're trying to do? Again, we're the solar siting subcommittee, so we're asking the question, to Mary's point at the beginning, to make the town plan a more useful regulatory document appropriate for solar siting. How might we use the tool of districts in the town plan?
What I think is that Ernie should read these court cases and then report back on what the
I'll gladly do that.
what the Supreme Court is saying about how to write language like this, because they're pretty. Beth Robinson wrote the decision before she went to the Second Circuit. It's a pretty thorough decision, although it's to me complicated. I'm not a lawyer.
Mhm.
And then
Okay.
there is also the question in here, you'll see, do you want to identify an industrial area? For instance, are there places you want to see solar development? Would those be appropriate to create into a different district?
Mm-hmm.
Or if we use this weighting sort of system,
Mhm.
and if it's exclusively, because I mean, I think, Jan's sort of concern is worth thinking about too. But I mean, there are more, instead of districts, there might be things, geographic areas that it's appropriate. Let's say I'm kind of sticking with the geographic. There's other things, other factors too, but there might be geographic things that are perfect and at the same time don't fight with other parts of the policy. Something that's like, something alongside of a road or something alongside of a highway that's in the town. That may be a perfect place to put stuff. Oh, wait a minute, that is a perfect place to put stuff.
So,
Since it's
so just to
already-
remind folks, is when we started this project, I think the one of the goals was not to try to do a full rewrite of the town plan. I think, Jan, you
Right.
talked about that, and just to say, okay, are there places that we can go in surgically in many ways and make some edits that will make this a more regulatory effective document? And it has to be effective
Yep.
in the way that the town wants it to be, but take away some of the ambiguities that were there and some of the not lack of clarity, as opposed to doing a whole rewrite, which is just a different process. That was I think the first planning committee meeting I attended. That was your kind of lens.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the balance is there in the sense that there's a minimum amount of work relative to editing, public hearings, select board conversations. So there's no point in going through all that work to change 3 sentences. But at the same time, if you change too much, then it just
Right.
bogs down and it's a 2-year project. So we need that balance. But less, if there are particular things and we can focus on them, we have a better chance of success. Mary Albert?
Yeah, and so in the light of making this a balanced document, I think we ought to really strive to find places that make it more amenable or more practical or more suitable, identify areas for solar development so that we can meet the target goals that a lot of us want to meet, even if it's not regulated. I think there are a lot of people in this town who really care about this. And so we should avoid this committee turning into a place that's just one big NIMBY. Thanks.
So, yeah, and I just, again, that is definitely not what this committee is and is trying to do. So I want to be clear on that and put us all pointing in the right direction. But I would, for the that whole topic, just let's stay focused on what we want to get. But what I saw in other town plans, which was interesting, East Montpelier, but Sharon, Stratford, and others, they very specifically will say, and that was my question to Kevin, to say, how are we going to be able to point to, Sudbury does it, they point to several places on the map, and lo and behold, developers basically blossom out of the ether and develop those sites that you point them at. And so
And Mary, that's why
clearly,
we specifically put in, do we want to identify industrial sites for development? So
right.
just to be very clear,
yeah.
that was an effort to say, are there places where this makes a lot of sense? Because this plan is used when you have plans, 150 to 500, that's when you go to this plan. So are there places that the town wants to do it? Doesn't matter if you want to put something in your
a carrot,
backyard.
I mean, it's somewhat a carrot and stick, or however you want to look at it. We will get far more, it's just be far more effective if, while you're pushing it away from certain places, you're pushing it towards other things, and not just solar, but all these different things. You simply stiff arming everything is always a losing battle, especially when there are pressures. So
Right, and
my
there was
question is, sorry, it's just, and you've said it, Annette, in looking at because I did the mapping exercise of how big is the Monchar parking lot and how big is the King Arthur roof, and Norwich is not an easy town to put a whole bunch of acres of panels on. And so that's part of, I went in looking, I went, where in the middle of the I-91 corridor, and so that's my question about in just looking where to encourage it. It's a challenge to find.
Then you have a
It is, but
town,
it's a challenge that we need to accept and that we need to achieve.
then you have a town like New Haven that had all kinds of three-phase power and all kinds of farmland, and they got so much development that it's filled up the grid so much that people can't put it on their businesses, and a lot of their circuits are overloaded. So it is a very challenging approach. But good for you, Jan, for doing that exercise, because that's what it takes. It's trying to slice and dice the town every way possible. There's one other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that's happened since I met with you before, and I don't have any details on it, but the state just got a $63 million federal grant for a program called Solar for All. And I'm sure that the details of it will be worked out over the next few months or year, but I believe that it will involve a lot of focus on community solar, on serving people who can't put it on their homes, on serving low income people. And so that's something that I don't know how much of a change that's going to be, but that's a lot of money for Vermont. And it just happened in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that is encouraging. And I think, how do we look at it regionally? I mean, just to be crass or to be specific about it, there are going to be better towns with more sites than other towns. And then the way the goals were set in the energy plan coming down through the regional commission, I believe it was by population, where it just said the 3,000 people in Norwich need to get 16 megawatts or whatever it was. How is the regional, and I absolutely not saying this because I don't want solar in Norwich. I'm saying it because I've stared at the maps a lot, and it's a hard place to put 15 500 kilowatt sites. How is the regional aspect looked at in this?
That's a really good
Just
question. Yeah. And I think that's something to talk to Two Rivers about. And I'll talk to the folks at the Department of Public Service about it too, that now it's getting very real. And if there is a lot of money for serving communities and towns that don't have a lot of capacity, I mean, the renewable energy standard that's still in play in the legislature involves a certain amount that enables the utilities to meet the standard by getting power outside of the state. So as long as it's new renewable energy. New Hampshire has done way less with solar than Vermont has. So regionally, there is I mean, Vermont's built more capacity for the size of the grid than any other state. So yeah, the regional question is a really good one.
It's just it's a bigger version of community solar. I mean,
Yeah.
if I put 500 kW and I do it for 10 of my neighbors, versus somebody putting up 2 or 5 megawatts and doing it for their neighboring town.
But then
or
the
even
trade-off
the
is the transmission costs. And so whenever you can build at load or close to load, then you are reducing the transmission costs, which are increasing and not in control of the utilities. So, I mean, for a community like Norwich, which generally has a lot, you know, you're well known for being one of the wealthiest or the wealthiest communities in the state. The and you already have a lot of people who've invested in solar for their homes. That is the first way to meet your local needs, is to encourage people to build solar when they can.
Mhm, mhm.
Jan,
Okay.
do you want us to keep trying to get through this document in the next
Let
bit,
me
or
just
do you
do a
time
I
check
mean,
or what
we
it else?
have from a time check point of view, other than people's brain capacity, we can do this for another 10, 15 minutes and then address the minutes. And then take it from there.
Yeah, so the next edits really address forest blocks. We've talked about that, I think, to talk about them rather than to minimize forest fragmentation, to think about adverse impact on forests and wildlife habitat, to promote forest health and ecological function. That let's see. And the next group of them, I think, and we're at forest block and habitat connectors section. I don't have the page number that you're
Page
looking at.
28 of the packet.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think you highlighted the boundaries of priority forest blocks delineated on the site level assessment. I may be the one that deleted this plan and any
Yeah.
implementing regulations treat
Yes.
map forest blocks in Norwich of 500 acres or more in area as shown in figure 8 as priorities for protection. I flag that for something for you to look at. Is 500 acres is a pretty large area. What you're hearing from the regional commission is different. It's about high priority forest blocks. So that's just a topic you need to discuss.
Okay.
And
What
it
parameters
sounds
you-
like they were referring to certainly Kevin's comments around forest blocks, priority, high priority,
Yeah.
not so high priority, a different part of town. Those were regional criteria in a sense. I mean, he was pulling that off A&R maps,
Okay.
not town maps,
Mhm.
right? So
So I don't know where
Norwich
the
does Norwich have a unique definition of a high priority forest block, or are we piggybacking on state ones?
and it is this 500 acres. Do you know where that came from?
That's the state.
That's the state?
I think that's in the statute that talks about forest blocks.
Okay. Well, you obviously need to have a conversation about what forest blocks and ridgelines you want to protect. That's
Right. Start with the value, what are the valuable things? And then cascade to, okay, how big are they? How are they defined? And then
you're not
where?
bound by any of these state standards. You can set your own standards for what makes sense for Norwich.
Well, they
Okay.
have to at least reach what they have to be at least as good as the states.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be better, but not
They can be
worse.
better, right?
So now we skip to the energy section. 3.1.
Yeah, you go past all the maps.
That's the match. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're on page 50.
And
Yeah,
so,
stop at page 40 of the packet. There's a protected land map. And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
added add town forest missing from this map.
okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
great, will do. So energy, under objectives, proposal that in the energy section, we say increase carbon capture by retaining forest blocks. There's been a lot of talk about forest blocks and their value. So that was one thing that might get some discussion. And then
Which
on
number? Which paragraph?
that's in the objectives, Ernie.
It's
So it's
three-
not
three
in the,
point-
it's
it's
not
3
in the, it doesn't have a number.
Okay.
It's 3-1B, but it's in between B and C.
Yeah. Mary?
Yeah, I think there should be a number in there, maybe 3C that, or 3-1.C that says increase renewable energy generation within the town of Norwich, both for community solar and others.
So that's I see that as that's what D says. Are you talking something different than, because right below
Yeah,
there
that's
is increase the amount of
3.1D.
renewable
Oh, okay. Yep.
use in
Yeah.
Norwich. I mean,
Yeah.
I do, as
And
is
it-
always going to be the case, we're going to try to promote things that are not, if not mutually exclusive, at least competitive. And that's part of the challenge here, but
Yeah.
we're clearly stating increase the amount of renewable energy being produced in Norwich as an objective.
Mm-hmm. So there's an edit to 3.2H. And I think that this addresses the issue that the current town plan defines the entire town of Norwich as a preferred site with the exception of 3 areas. So it's this presumption that all of Norwich meets the Public Utility Commission definition of a preferred site is to strike that language and to instead say for solar generation projects from 15 to 500 kilowatts, they meet the Public Utility Commission of preferred sites when located, and then identify where are the areas where they are, where they, so rather than saying everything, just say here are the areas where they meet the definition. And they must not be located in the ridgeline protection overlay area, the shoreline protection overlay area, the historic village district, and forest blocks as defined in Norwich. So that's a big change.
Yeah,
and one that I'm sure will get a lot of discussion.
Right, that's the biggie. And it, just to put it in context though, we 5100, or there's a definition of preferred sites in the state regs where it talks about gravel pits and brownfields and all that thing. And then there's, 1 of 10 listed there that then say, and other places that are designated by the towns as preferred. So this is us talking to our slice of that piece. Somebody could still look at a brownfield if we had it in Norwich and say this is a preferred site based on the state criteria. Right. We don't preclude those. Simply
right. We don't preclude those,
to...
but we don't say that our entire town is a preferred site for people. As that's the current language, but instead say, where is it that these can be, in the same way that we define other places in town where things can be and cannot be.
How do we see you reference, and we'd have to think through it, but you reference the Norwich land use regulations. How does that work with our trying to have the town plan stand alone? Where are those regulations? And if
that's
those are
existing
the bylaws,
language, yeah.
If those are the bylaws or anything outside the town plan, then we just broke our own
Right.
rules.
So you need
We'll
to
have to work
change
on it.
that
Yeah.
to reference the plan. Yep.
Yeah, we'd have to change that.
And
And then the
okay, I mean,
other thing
if
that
there's a
yeah,
map and the
Yeah.
map is incorporated in the plan, then fine,
Yeah.
but.
all right,
Yep.
so we'll, and the other thing is that this town plan does not say anything about a solar generation project greater than 500 kilowatt hours. And in given, that just, does the town want to say something about that? Do we want to make it available that someone could do that, could come in and put in that size?
Was it East
Yeah.
Montpelier that I definitely saw a town plan that essentially said, we
No,
don't
you can't do
we
it.
don't think anything over 500 is appropriate for our town.
Exactly.
Yeah, a
Um,
number of towns have tried to set limits on total acreage used or on the size of the array. And, you got to keep in mind, there is no PUC ruling on whether or not they will give substantial deference to those policies. We have no idea because they haven't made any decisions based on those. But I think it's important for you all to decide what you want and put it in your town plan.
But when you say so, it hasn't been shown to have substantial difference, is that if we had or have there been enhanced energy plans approved, meaning that if you've got an enhanced energy plan, that means it's getting substantial
That's
difference.
substantial deference, but the PUC has yet, to the best of my knowledge, not used an enhanced energy plan to make a decision about a solar array.
To say so that whatever, it's a 1 megawatt, somebody comes in with a 1 megawatt and a town plan says we don't want anything bigger than 500 and
Mhm.
it's an enhanced energy plan and the PUC says, oh, no, you can't have the 1 megawatt because look at what it says in the plan. That hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened. We don't know about those kinds of parameters. We know slopes have been litigated for housing and that the Supreme Court says you have to specify the percentage of the slope of the degrees. But in terms of these acreage and enhanced energy plans, it's kind of amazing to think this law went into effect in 2017 and that there has yet to be a PUC decision on these types of things on any enhanced energy plan.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that would be able to, because it's already protected by the state also, is things like saying that you cannot encroach on a wetland, for instance. And there are a few other land forms that the state says no encroaching. It's the whole state benefits from these types of landforms just simply not being disturbed at all. And I'm picking just wetlands because that's one that seems to be not just in Vermont, but almost universal in almost every state. So and I can just imagine if you say you cannot encroach on a wetland for these even for these projects, you don't have to set that some sort of a maximum size because I don't think you can go anywhere in Vermont and not hit a wetland sooner or later. And I mean that.
Yeah.
So, out of 58 acres, I can tell you that well over a third of it is unusable because of wetland.
Yeah.
And then another big chunk of it's unusable because of slope and cliffs. So
let's take, I mean, this is really, we got to kind of the pithiest statement in the plan, and that may be a good pausing place. And then I would certainly encourage everyone to dig into that. We've had a good conversation around, all right, things have to be defined. What do we value has to be defined, ridge lines, forest blocks, and so forth. And then this gets to kind of putting it all together in one place. But I think that's probably a good stopping point for tonight. Maybe Linda, you had your hand up.
Thank you. And it's not a long involved comment. I just wanted to suggest with regard to trying to figure out what you might want to say with regard to citing projects that are larger than 500 kilowatts. I would suggest that one method would be something that you kind of has been talked about vaguely before, which is anything that size is going to be limited by the utility interconnection. So we're limited by the three-phase power lines in town, which are limited. And so I think it would be possible for the subcommittee to actually kind of just look at where those are, look at the parcels that are adjacent for them, see what you think about them. I think that there are some that could, if the landowner was interested, I think they could host something that size. So I think it would be worthwhile trying to get that specific for this very limited solar topic. So just wanted to suggest that.
So I think I'd like to kind of flip this on its head, and Linda, you're right, that, and I would propose just as one thing to do for next meeting is that I will pull up or I'll put it in the packet, which is the mapping I have, what Google Maps or whatever I did at Google Earth, where I looked, so like Leonard Cook's old site up at the top behind Agway. Okay, it happens to be X number of acres. And so I did that in town and came up with a certain number of sites and number of acres that are basically where might we put solar? Ask the question, what are truly preferred sites? Because if we can show, agreement and movement on some of those, then I think we have a more balanced conversation than simply not prohibit, not, and try to come at it from both sides. So I'm perfectly happy to kind of clean up those maps and, freak people out a little bit by sticking them up there and saying, hey, how about these? And it's easy. The ones that are kind of in the middle of the highway are easy, and this parking lot or that parking lot, but there aren't that many that are easy, but we should at least show them to start that effort. Okay. So I think let's pause it there. I mean, thank you very much, Mary, for putting the time in here. I think we can continue where we left off. And certainly thank you, Annette, for putting the time in to help us through this.
And I'd like to suggest for people the members of the public who feel like they want to have input, when I was on the planning commission, I found that the best input that I could get was when people actually did this same sort of thing and offered language, either new language or replacement language. And so I hope that you can get community members to provide you with, as you suggested, lots and lots of things, not just comments, but actual written words like we were doing, just to try and prompt discussion or come up with something that does what is needed. And I will send those 2 court cases decisions to Mary, and she can send them to Ernie and the rest of you if you want to read them.
Yeah. Okay. Can we have a motion on the minutes of April 16?
I moved.
Second.
Any comments on that? A full half of them are simply the references and links that Annette gave us. So I think we buried everyone who wanted maps to look at, and that was the purpose of it. So it's a wonderful set of resources, and just having those minutes is something we can point people to, and that's very helpful. Okay. So I would agree with the move and seconded, so the minutes have been approved. Any comments from the public before we adjourn? Okay, thank you. And I would encourage that I will put it in the minutes of this meeting to kind of answer Mary Albert's question about encouraging the community to send in written comments, and also kind of to the mapping exercise I was referring to, encouraging the public to toss out preferred sites or preferred siting criteria over and above what the state says for Norwich specifically, where are good spots. so that we can have a balanced conversation. Okay, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
All
Okay,
right.
Second.
The ayes
Owe me a
have
Coke,
it.
owe me a
All
Coke.
Thank you, everybody.
See
We'll
ya.
talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.